Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Strength, Yoga, and Freedom podcast. Yes, if you are new here, my name is Justin. This is the podcast where we use the philosophy of yoga in a practical and everyday way, one small step at a time, to become happier people. Don't forget, you can follow me on Instagram. You can contribute to listener support. You can sign up for our free newsletter. The links for all of those things are in the description of this episode, either on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube if you're listening to it there. Now, today's episode I'm so excited about. It's a little different than our normal ones, where we actually have a special guest on today who is incredibly inspiring. You know, I met Brian Boothe, who is our guest, when I was at a Yoga Masterclass Weekend in Southern Ohio. Now, he is from South Bend, Indiana, and he drove to a town just outside of Columbus, Ohio, where we met for this weekend. We participated in this weekend, and when we met, we started talking about teaching yoga, practicing yoga, the purpose, our life, our histories, et cetera, et cetera. And when I mentioned this podcast, he offered to come on to share his story. And for that, Brian, I am so grateful. Now, Brian has 500 hours of yoga teacher training behind him, and he currently teaches several forms of yoga to his students. Now, I was so excited to have this conversation with him, as I said, and I know that what he says is going to inspire you as well. I actually had a few aha moments while listening to this, especially when he started talking about breath work and breathing. And I want to have him back on to talk about that even more, because it is so fascinating. You're going to love it. So I'm going to stop talking now and get to our conversation, which, by the way, we recorded about 1 month after we returned from that weekend of yoga. So it was still pretty fresh for both of us. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get to it. All right. Hey, Brian, how are you?
I'm doing excellent. How are you?
Good. Brian, I am so glad that you joined us today on the Strength, Yoga, and Freedom podcast. For those of you who are just new to this podcast, or for those of you who have been listening for a long time, sometimes what we do is I love to bring people on here who have had an impact through yoga in one way or another. Sometimes they find things that come to them when they're on their mats. They find things that come to them off their mats. And, you know, I truly believe that the practice of yoga encompasses all of that. And Brian is someone who I had met down in a masterclass weekend that we took with Travis Elliott, who is the creator of Interdimension TV. So he does all kinds of online yoga, and he happened to come to Southern Ohio. And we met at this weekend workshop where it was 3 days. We did about 10 hours of yoga, and it was super exciting. And we just started talking about how our journeys were, kind of everybody's journey comes together at some point. But it's always great to connect with someone else when you're at events like that to talk about the journeys in the past. And Brian, you are an RYT 500, correct? You had teacher training of 500 hours.
Yes, that's correct.
Awesome. So where are you? So we met in Southern Ohio. Where are you from originally?
I'm from Northern Indiana. 4-hour drive, maybe closer to 5. It was a long drive, but it was well worth it.
And I know he asked us, and for those of you who listen to this podcast, I had an episode about this, but he asked us about sharing a word at the beginning of the weekend, and mine was discovery. And I discovered a lot for sure. But when we were there, we talked about this podcast, and Brian was like, "Oh my gosh, I'd love to come on and share my story with you." And I was like, "That sounds awesome." So it's now been about a month since we've been there, and we just got together today over the phone to talk about his journey. And I have to share with you guys, I don't know any of this story that he's about to share with us. So I am just as excited to hear how he found yoga, how it impacted his life. Here's what's interesting. The one nugget I do know about Brian, he met yoga after he met his wife. So he was introduced to the practice of yoga
after through his wife, which I think is awesome. So Brian, tell us about it. What happened? What led you to this? I can't wait to hear it myself.
Okay, real quick, we'll circle back to the Masterclass Weekend. You
Sure.
had asked what the word or the intention was. For me, it was realignment to eliminate distraction.
Mm.
I had found that you get busy with life and you find yourself doing more, and it becomes a distraction on the things that you really need to do or have to do, right? So that work is within yourself. It could be doing nothing. It could be being quiet. It could be reading more meditation, more of the good stuff, right? And you find hobbies and you find all kinds of stuff that ends up being a distraction. So for me, it was just to realign and get back on track and focus on what needs to be focused on.
And you
I think,
found that worked for you?
yeah, that all that power yoga, it kind of worked all that garbage out. So it was great. So yeah, my story, I don't think it's really anything exciting or riveting, so that people aren't going to be on the edge of their seats. But it's it's a story that I've shared before. I love to share it just because I love yoga. I really truly do. When I first got introduced to yoga, I guess you could kind of say I was a gym rat. I was working out 6 days a week, sometimes twice a day, like early in the morning and in the evening. And my wife had been doing yoga, and my first real experience with yoga was P90X with Tony Horton.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I hated it. It was awful.
Mm-hmm.
So yoga day, I skipped that one. I
Mm.
hated it. It was just awful. So she invited me to come to a class, and I'm thinking, this. I'll do it because she asked me, and this is just going to be dumb, right? And so I had gone to the gym and then got my workout in, and then came to a class afterwards. And I told her, I said, I'd already done my workout. This will be easy. And she said, you already went to the gym? I was like, yeah. She's like, oh boy. So I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And so again, I was, I would say I was in really good shape. And I went to my first yoga class, and it wasn't power yoga. It wasn't anything. It was what I consider maybe a slow flow type class.
Okay.
And I remember uh, being completely drenched. And this wasn't hot yoga or anything. Even though I was in great shape, I was doing things with my body different ways, and creating that heat within. And I had a crazy workout, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, "What is going on?" I thought I was in good shape, and yeah, I was in good shape in one way, but I found that my body needed to work out different ways. So I kind of sort of liked it, but not really. It took me a few classes to really get into it. And we had been doing a few classes, and my wife said, hey, I'm going to sign up for a teacher training. You should do this with me. And I was like, okay. I considered it. At that point, we had been doing a little more yoga together, and we kind of came to a point in our relationship where things were rough. I mean, things were getting rough, and it was right before the pandemic, before things started shutting down, and
Mm-hmm.
told my wife that it's like, boy, I don't think it's a good idea to be spending the money right now. And she looked at me and said, well, in order for this marriage to work, this is what needs to be done. And I didn't really know what to think of that. It's kind of, okay, yeah, whatever. So she went ahead, signed up, and I passed on it because I was just looking at money and the way things were going. I think it was a good idea. So she got in. She was maybe a couple weeks in, and things were getting rougher within the marriage. And I remember what she said. So if this marriage is going to work, you're going to need to do this. So I reached out to them and said, hey, is it too late for me to get in? I've only missed a couple weeks. They said, sure, jump on in. And I got to say right now, I mean, that's got to be the best decision I think I've ever made in my life. Not only for my marriage, but for myself. And really the thing too was I didn't go in with any intention of teaching. That was the farthest thing from my mind.
Mm-hmm.
What I wanted to do was learn and get more knowledge on what I'm doing and why am I doing it. Because it had become more of a workout. And they say it's not a workout, it's a work in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is so true. So I had this strong urge to figure out, why am I doing all this? And as we learn, in teacher training, you get the history and the philosophy, and these two things that I love. So it's really interesting to me. And as it progressed on, I just fell more and more and more in love with it. I just couldn't get enough of it. And by the end of the teacher training, because it was, I think 9 months for the 200, and it was in person, which was great too.
Mm-hmm.
And the very end, we had to do our teach our sequence to the other people in the class, and boy, I was nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And even at that time, I think I was still on the fence of if I wanted to teach. And I had taught my class, and it was awful. it was rough, right, as it should be. But I went back to my yoga afterwards and think about all the pressure you put on yourself, and so why am I doing this? Do you want to just be me, and just let it come? And with everything in life, with experience, things get better. So I knew that in order to be a better teacher, I had to teach more. So I graduated from the class and started teaching right away, and then started teaching more and more. And I found all I wanted to do was I want to share yoga with everybody, because there's so much more to yoga than the asanas and the moving, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people think that that's what yoga is. It's the workout. And what I've found is I love to teach them that there's, it's so deep and there's so much more, that basically everything you do in life is yoga. If you're breathing, it's yoga. If you're at the store and you hold the door for somebody, that's yoga. And then teaching them all about all that different things, and for them to realize that it's more than just a workout. And the things when you're on your mat, the things that you can come back to, and the meditation part. And it was kind of strange that before I was teaching, so I'm going to kind of go backwards here. Leading up to the graduation, we have to do so many hours of karma yoga, which is teaching classes for free.
Okay.
And as I was doing that, I was starting to struggle to find people to teach to.
Mm-hmm.
But people started coming to me and asking questions, and this interest was there, and it started to kind of light my fire. It's like, oh boy, a lot of people want to know a lot of things about this, and there's so much to teach, and that's what just got me excited about it. And then so had been teaching for a while, and I decided I want more. So I went ahead and signed right up for the 500, along with my wife. And we did this one online because where we're at, there was nobody in person that was doing the 300 to finish out that 500. So we had to do it online, which was a whole different experience. I don't know with your teacher training if it was in person or online.
It was in person.
Okay. Have you done any training online?
Yes, I have done 2 online trainings, not a full comprehensive, 200, 300-hour program, but I've done segments of trainings online just for, teacher hours and things like that. It is so different.
Oh boy,
So
I'll tell
different.
you, I will agree. It's not the same for me. I have to be in person. I have to feel the energy. When you're in a room with people, especially like-minded people, you really can feel the energy and feed off of that. And when you don't have that because you're doing it online, it's a lot different. But I'm glad I did it because I learned a lot
Hmm.
about myself. That I don't have to have that. I accomplished it. I got it done. I just had to do it a different way. It wasn't the way I liked or the way I wanted. So I made the best of it, and at least now I know that I absolutely have a preference of anything's going to be in person if I have
I
the
have to
opportunity.
I have to interject too and say what you said just now is so pivotal because when I started my teacher training, it was at the end of 2019 and it went into the beginning of 2020, and then we all know what happened then. And the last, I would say, 3 months of my initial 200-hour wound up being done through online, and then we finished it in person. So the back and forth of that, and then if you've ever talked to, I mean, you just shared your experience with your 300-hour program. If you've ever spoken to or interacted with anyone who did their initial 200 hours just online during that time, the connection, I mean, just to be blunt, because that's the way it is that's the way it is. I feel like online has a little bit of, you get robbed essentially of that in-person connection, and it has to be done at certain times. We know that, but there is just something else to yoga, especially when you're going through a teacher training, that must be done in person, I believe. So I need to echo that too, because I think that's so important.
I agree, and not to say that anybody who had done their teacher training, completely virtual, that that's okay. You can still work, but yeah, I agree. There is a part that has to be in person because when you teach, you're teaching people in person. Unless you do it strictly on YouTube or strictly virtual, may Zoom classes. But I found that I don't I don't prefer that at all.
The energy is different too. I like to really hear breathing, really good breathing when I'm in person, and you just can't hear that over any other method.
Yes, yes, I agree. But I found that I love teaching in the studio, and uh, like I say, it's a journey, right? So I am learning like every single day, every class I teach, I learn something, whether it be about myself or the students or anybody or anything. It's just an opportunity to learn. And I had just recently had been struggling, I felt, with my classes,
Mm-hmm.
fumbling over my words, and I kept getting my chin and my elbow and my knee all mixed up. There
Mm-hmm.
was one day I said, "Hey, put your feet up by your ears." It was something crazy. It's not even possible.
Right.
And some people can beat themselves up over that because it's not perfect. I just
Yeah.
laugh at it. That's I realize I'm not perfect, and I want everybody to know that I'm not perfect. And I made fun of it and had fun with it, and they all laughed and we had a good time. And we moved on. And I remember early on in my teacher training, uh, the, the teacher said that, sometimes people will put their yoga teacher on a pedestal.
Yeah.
And it's important to know that, you know, yes, we teach yoga and we may have a lot more training and knowledge about it, but we're just normal people and we mess up, and we have good days, we have bad days. I think we just have more knowledge of the tools that help us
Hmm.
navigate through that kind of stuff.
Well, I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind, because there were a few things that I picked up from and I wrote down as you were talking. So, would you mind if I asked you a couple questions about a few things you said?
That would be great.
So, all right, let me ask you. So, at the very beginning of your story, you talked about P90X
Yeah.
and you said that you skipped over the yoga days. What is it then that you feel like or why do you feel like you skipped those then, as opposed to the way you see yoga now? So, what do you think was standing in your way then?
Then I think it was full locust.
Oh,
Or like the Superman. It was certain things that my body just wasn't
okay.
liking, and also I didn't, at that point I didn't know that my body really needed that day that was in P90X
Yeah.
to rest and to heal and to stretch, and um, not always be go 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 and work work work, because that's how you hurt yourself.
You found a way, as most people do who practice yoga regularly on their mats, to connect the brain to what's happening in your body. And you just said that about the burn. You're turning your attention to the shoulder that's burning. And what it teaches us is that when you're doing that on your mat, as you just said, yoga is a practice, you're training your mind to do that off the mat. And then you're training yourself to when you have to have those difficult conversations with people, or when you have to wake up when the alarm goes off, or when you have to do the things that you don't want to do. The practice of yoga on your mat trains your brain to do those things. And it's almost as though like you said about Warrior Two, you're going to hold Warrior Two. And even though it might seem like when you're in a Warrior Two pose, it doesn't look like it's hard, or maybe the first 30 seconds don't feel hard. And then all of a sudden, you are in that discomfort and you are literally practicing, okay, I'm going to get through this. And my mind is going to have to be redirected, just like you would if you were in a life situation. And I think that's so important. And I love it.
Yeah, and exactly like you said, it can help you in other aspects of life. You said, having that hard conversation with somebody at work, maybe it's an employee um, or friend or a stranger,
Mhm.
whatever it is. It can help with those situations. I found that also, we'll even use that Warrior Two example, is being body aware. So
Mm.
I've got an office job, and I sit at a desk, and not all the time though. I like to be up and mobile, but I know that when I'm stressed, I shrug my shoulders,
Mm.
and I catch myself. I become aware, because I'm within yoga. When you do practice more yoga, you definitely you have to become aware of your body. It's alignment, where you put your feet, your arms, your hands, your heads, and all that good stuff. But then it starts filtering into just normal life. You're walking down the street, it's like, oh man, why am I shrugging my shoulders? Why am I so tense? So,
Mm.
take a deep breath and just relax things. That's the great thing that I found is just throughout life. I mean, it just helps you, and then you can just relax when you're aware of what your body is doing, the places you're tense that you're normally not aware of because you're just kind of on autopilot. That's when you can start to um, work into those areas. Because if you're not aware of something, then you can't fix something, right? you don't know something's not broken, then you can't fix it.
Love it. The other thing that I picked up from your I think it might have been the most powerful thing you said through the whole conversation. You said, life is yoga, no matter what you're doing. And you just described that again in that when you said earlier, when you're breathing, you're doing yoga, because we know pranayama, the breath, is one of the 8 limbs of yoga. And that is something that everyone is practicing. And I that ties me to the other thing I had written down here was when you said you're basically life is yoga. You also use the example of when you were discussing how when you went through teacher training, you did not have the intention to teach, which we know in the yoga community as teachers, a lot of people enter teacher trainings and they don't have the intention to teach. But then you said, in order to be a better teacher, I had to teach more. And so it's almost as though you were using that same framework again of life being yoga to realize, listen, I have to do this more. I have to apply my practice to physically practice teaching, so that because people were asking you about teaching. And I thought that was incredible how you connected all of that together.
Yeah. I like to say, so I also do I introduce at my studio. It's what do we call it? Intro to yoga class.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did is it's a real, I say brief class. I think we schedule it for 2 hours, but if they let me, I go 4.
Wow.
Because I love to talk, and I have set up a whole schedule, everything to do, and we talk briefly on the philosophy. So I want people to know a little bit, just a little glimpse of maybe the history of it, or maybe some of the words. But I guess my real intention is how do I get people into the studio? And this was right after a lot of the virtual stuff. Is how do I get people back to the studio?
Yeah.
And also, again, with talking with people, I found that people that haven't done yoga at a studio, they've done it on YouTube or anywhere else. They're scared, they're nervous because they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So I think, I'm gonna put this together, and I'm gonna get them comfortable, and we're gonna do a small class, and we're gonna do some alignment, and I'm gonna tell them, this is what you do when you enter a studio, and this is what you wear. And I base this all the questions I've had, and especially being a male, a lot of guys ask a lot of questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the intention there was also I would get more guys into the studio, introduce it. So I had done that, and I like to tell them that I don't teach yoga, or we don't do yoga, we are yoga. So I think I'm not doing yoga right now, I'm being yoga.
That's great.
If that makes sense, right? So, again, the example, and I do use the example. I like that example of holding the door for, maybe somebody's got their hands full, or some old lady, or just just being nice. Anybody, hold the door open for them, and that's you're practicing yoga. That's karma yoga right there. And the different aspects of yoga that you can do that you don't even realize what you're doing.
I think that's awesome. And I think it's easy for all of us to forget that when we do those nice gestures for people, you really are tapping into your inner being, and that's you, that is your yoga. I often say when I teach yin classes that when you're activating that parasympathetic nervous system, that nice calm nervous system, when you're in those yin postures, like we were for almost 3 hours in that class we took, which was amazing.
Awesome? Wasn't that was great?
Yeah, and for those of you out there who do not know what yin yoga is a very passive practice where you just get into poses and you might hold them for 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes. And I remember at the end of it, he said, he goes, wow, that we extended it to 2.5 hours this year, but next year it might be 3. And we were excited. But I said to Brian, I said, man, some of those poses were uncomfortable. And Brian was we were right next to each other. So I felt him fidgety. I could feel the energy. I could feel he was fidgety in a couple things, and I was fidgety. And I was like, man, my low back and my hip here. And then he said, oh, I had a couple of things too. But it's, where am I going with this story? We're talking, yin yoga. And so the practice of yin yoga and the nervous system, that parasympathetic nervous system, that is where your relaxed creative being lives. We don't want to live in that state of alarm, the other nervous system. And that holding the door example is something you do from that nervous, that sense of peacefulness, and it's in there. It just needs to be activated. And I love hearing you say that you want to bring more males to yoga, because I think there can be a stigma sometimes with males thinking that only just females do yoga, and that's just simply untrue. And so I love that, and I honor that for you. I love that. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's still a passion to not only bring more people to yoga, but definitely more males.
Yeah.
You're talking about breath, and I'm glad you brought up breath, because I kind of gone down a path that I'm starting to. Actually, I started another. This one is an online course, but it's to be certified, basically in breath work.
Nice.
And learning a lot of stuff I knew, about the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic system. But again, we'll go back to the example of holding the door. When you're in that fight or flight, that reaction state, you're not thinking about anything but yourself and getting into that store, getting in and getting out and going on to the next thing you do.
Yes.
So your mind is not even there to help somebody. But when you can slow down and again activate that parasympathetic, that rest and relax, you're more peace, and you're thinking about others. You're not thinking about yourself. You're not focused on yourself. You have more love, more compassion for maybe that little old lady that just, she's just old, and she's lived a long time, and you feel so grateful that she's still here, and you want to hold the door for her because you just love her because she's so beautiful. You can't activate that when you're in that fight or flight, or that sympathetic system. But with breath, there is so much that you can do.
Yes.
I could talk hours and hours and hours about just breathing. And one thing that people may know but may not even realize that they know is that there's very few people that know how to breathe correctly. And if you ever want to know if you're breathing correctly or not, if you have access to a baby, or we'll say a puppy, a dog, right? So watch them sleep and see what's moving on them, and you'll notice their belly goes up and down. A child or a baby's belly, they breathe up and you breathe from the belly. And then if you maybe put your hand on your belly as you're breathing right now, it's probably not going up and down. Most people breathe from their shoulders, or their upper chest, instead of that full breath from the belly. And that's what I say when people don't know how to breathe. Yeah, people are breathing, and you're I guess sustaining life, but there is a correct way to breathe. And when you breathe that way, you may start getting lightheaded because it's way different.
Oh, wow.
And I noticed, again, back to beginning with yoga, I would always get so dizzy because I didn't know how to breathe. You moving it, inhale, exhale, like, oh, I'm about to pass out.
Yeah.
But once you learn how to breathe and learn how to do that, you're like, oh, I kind of like this. But if you've got energy that you need to just get burned up, and you can accomplish this through breathing, Kapalabhati, the breath of fire, right? It'll activate that furnace in that solar plex area, and it'll burn up all that garbage, and then you get rid of it through the breath. It's great. Or maybe you need to calm down. Say you want to activate that parasympathetic system. Take a deep inhale and make that exhale longer than the inhale. When you extend that exhale, it sends brain or signals to the brain saying, hey, you're calm, you're safe, and then your body's soft. Another reason why before yoga classes, a lot of times there will be breathing exercises. What that's doing is
Hmm.
preparing your body for your practice, so you don't hurt yourself.
We
So
might
so
have
many
to have you
great
back on to
things.
talk about breathing too.
Yeah. So
I love
actually,
that. I'm over here writing and just being a student. I love it.
thank you. There is a book I want to recommend to anybody listening. I like to read, and again, that knowledge. I just love to have knowledge, and I find that I can't read enough, and I don't do a great job of making time for it. But when I do read, I love it. Yeah, so it's just called Breathe by James Nestor. It is
We'll
a
put a link in the show notes too, maybe on Amazon so people can go click it and go grab it.
Yes, that would be great. It's just a great book, and it's about this guy who had kind of found breathing accidentally. Well, actually, I think he was going through some issues and ended up at a breathing class, and it is kind of all history from there. But that's a really bad description of the book, but it's if you're interested in breath and what breath can do and his findings, because there's some scientific stuff that's
Oh
going on,
yeah.
some testing, and it's a fantastic book.
Well, I'm certainly going to get it,
Yes, highly
and
recommend it.
we will thank you for that, and we're going to put we'll put a link down when this episode comes out so you all can grab it. I think that it's important for everyone who's listening to really take stock of what Brian just said about breathing, because so many, and Brian, you are also a listener of this podcast, so you know this as well. A lot of folks who listen to this podcast, and the reason this podcast is out there is because there are those of us, like myself included, who want to do things to change their life to become happier people. And what Brian is talking about, I think, is so critical when it comes to the breathing, is because we get into these situations where we have doubts and we have we don't feel like we can do things, and we don't feel like we're good enough, or we don't feel like we're strong enough. We have lots of fear, and we have all this trauma we've dealt with in the past, and we sometimes don't know where to go forward. And we have this tool. Every one of us has this tool of breathing and breath. And you just so beautifully put it, is that when you can switch it and start to be in those situations where the body relaxes and the body softens, it allows you to make those better decisions, and it allows you to come into some inner power, because all the stuff in your head that you hear is just like we talked about when we were talking about breathing and using the solar plexus and things like that, getting rid of garbage,
Mm-hmm.
because our minds like to play tricks like that. It's just the way our human brains are designed to survive. And so these are the tools we have. And I think breathing is so critical. What I think is important for everybody to understand is we have this tool. And so now we have this additional tool, another book, and there's tons of research and things about breath. But I am so grateful you brought that recommendation out there too. I want to ask you, well, this is the only last question I have about your story, is you said that we put yoga teachers on a pedestal sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is such an important thing for us to recognize and to just quickly unfold, because it is almost as though I remember when I started doing yoga and there was a teacher who was at the studio that I would be practicing in or whatever it was. And if that teacher was with me, I always tended to feel nervous as a student.
Yeah.
And so I think, do you have anything that you would say to the folks who are listening out there? If they're, and I want you to tie this, if you could, to where you talked about how when you teach the beginners coming in, it's all kind of a beginners thing. And what would you say to people who are nervous about, what their first yoga class would be like, or being next to a teacher and having them on this pedestal? Like, what would you say to those folks who are nervous about stuff like that? I think that's important.
I would say that yeah, I would definitely let them know that we are all just beings, and throughout your practice, you'll find that you may be nervous, maybe because that teacher is there, or maybe because the person beside you or in front of you or behind you is doing things with their body that maybe they saw on Instagram, or doing some crazy things which may be intimidating.
Mm.
And just use that as a, again, as a tool, as a reminder that when you start thinking about that nervousness because of that person's there, that come back to your mat, because the people that are doing yoga are doing yoga. They're not looking at you. They're not judging you. They're not, let's say, saying to themselves, "Oh boy, that person can't, um, go all the way over in their forward fold, or they look weird in their down dog." Or, people, if you're on your mat, you are on your mat. It doesn't
Mm.
matter what's going on, and sometimes that reassurance that people aren't staring at you, and people aren't judging you, people aren't looking at you. Um, Sometimes that helps ease that pain, or I'm sorry, not that
Mm.
pain, but that nervousness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then again, as you progress through your journey, yoga journey, you will find, yeah, when you're on your mat, you're on the mat, and sometimes there's nothing else that exists. That you just
Mm.
you go away. You're not even in that room anymore. Um, so I guess that's what I would say is just you're there for you.
Absolutely. And what you said about you're on the mat and everything goes away is so critical, because we have to deal with a lot every day. We have a lot going on. And to take 60 minutes, 90 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever the class length is, if it's a class that you're going to, or if you're whatever you're doing, that time is for you. It's not for anyone else. It is for you, because in order to truly move past the doubt and the fear, coming inside in the journey, as you said, Brian, the journey is what's important.
Well, so there's times where people will come into a class, and I can just feel their energy sometimes,
Mhm.
and I know that maybe they're scatterbrained, or maybe they come in a little, they come in hot, right? They just rush out of work and hit traffic, and they're coming in, they don't want to miss the class, and you can feel that. So there's times where I may do a short visualization meditation, um, prior, to help them get rid of some of that stuff, and help them get rid of the to-do list that they have to do later, or maybe thinking about the things that they didn't get done while they were still at work, and using that to bring them to the present, to the now, and reminding them that they're there for themselves. And you have 60 minutes where, if you're a mom, there's no kids asking anything of you. No, nobody's begging. There's no spouse needing this or that from you. You're at a time and a place where it's just you, and you should cherish that, and take full advantage of it, and not feel guilty because you're doing that. Um, just, and I like to say, my teacher said, if your cup's not full, then how do you expect to feed people, right?
Yeah.
And that can happen a lot as teachers. You constantly give, and it's easy to get caught up in that. But if you don't have your own practice, or you're not filling your cup, then you can't continue sharing and giving, and doing. And that's the same as being a parent, or even a spouse. You a lot of times the other will ask a lot of you, and it'll suck you dry. And in order to continue filling that cup, yoga is that thing
Yeah.
where you give back to yourself, and then it just helps you be a better person, and be more available, and a better parent, better spouse.
And I think that is a key to being a happier person,
I
just
agree.
a happier person. And the question I wanted to ask you, and the statement I wanted to make also, is you mentioned, back quickly to the and you even just said it again about meditation. Sometimes you talked about breath work before class and getting yourself into the state to prepare your body to move. One of the things that we do a lot in the local studio that I teach at is we ohm, and I know we did this in Travis's class. We ohmed, and I find that ohming, not only is it a beautiful tradition to ohm, but it's also humming like that. The actual sound of humming literally activates your vagus nerve, which calms your sympathetic nervous system down into that parasympathetic state. And so that's what I was going to ask you. Do you ever do anything like that? Do you ever ohm, or do you guys practice that at the studio you do as well, or in your own classes? I love that myself.
Absolutely. I don't do it every class. I do it a lot. Well, I guess it kind of depends, but
Mm-hmm.
yes, I love it. I absolutely love it. I would do it all day long if I could.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I found this thing on Spotify, and it was I think it's like an hour of just straight oming. It's
Wow.
just om, and so I've got a pretty close to an hour commute to work and like an hour back. So I spend about 2 hours in my car just going back and forth to work. And there was time, after a stressful day, I'll put that on and just listen to ohms the whole way. And uh, I just want to put a little warning in there. Be careful doing that. You may become so relaxed that you
Mm-hmm.
um, forget you're driving. So just be real careful.
Sure.
But it does, it really activates that parasympathetic, and you get relaxed. And can I share one thing that I learned about Om that I think is really interesting?
Please.
There's four parts to the Om. Are you aware of that?
I am not. Tell
Okay.
me.
Okay, great. So four parts, right? So when you Om, so you've got the O first, which comes from the belly, and the O, which is the rib cage, and the okay, which kind of comes up, and then you kind of feel that the jaw or the teeth vibrate, and then the fourth part is silence. You go Om, and you hold the silence, and then you Om again. So you don't go straight into the next Om. You have to have that fourth part, which is the silence.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
um, yeah, and that's the thing too. You learn within yoga too is silence is okay. Silence is good.
This. As it is. For those of you that are listening, I told Brian when we first got on the phone, today is a day I've been taking just for myself, in silence and quiet, just restorative, because silence is a way for you to reconnect. And I'm glad you shared that about them. Now I know. I love that.
Yeah.
Um, I want to finish up with just quickly. Your wife has a yoga business. Is that true? I hear.
Yeah, she's in North Carolina, and she teaches at three different studios there,
Okay.
and she does some stuff on her own. It's kncyoga.com. So if you're
Okay.
in the Charlotte or Mooresville, Davidson area, look it up. She does the in-person stuff. She's got some classes she teaches at parks. She started doing a little virtual, but she doesn't do that anymore. But yeah, check it out.
I love that. So we'll put that in the description too. It's kncyoga.com. And Brian, I would love to have you come back on a future episode and talk more about breathing, because your breathing expertise far outweighs mine, and I would love to selfishly learn. And
Sure,
I'm sure
yeah.
people who are on this, who are listening, this will benefit too, because we need a breathing practice to become the versions of ourselves that we know we can be. And that's just one tool to get us there. And I think that's an important thing. So I'd love to have you back to talk about that.
Sure, that would be great.
I love it. I love it. Well, Brian, thank you. thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. I am grateful that we met, and I'm grateful that I was able to share practices with you. And I am grateful that you are here and shared so much great information about yourself. Some information that you certainly didn't have to share, but you chose to. And I appreciate you being open and honest about things. And I'm very grateful that you shared all of that with our community. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I gotta say, I do love your podcast. I do listen to it. It's great stuff. It really, really is, and it gets me thinking, and it really helps me continue to keep that alignment of being a better person. And you touch on a lot of great little things that kind of get forgotten about. It's like, oh gosh, yeah. Well, you do a fantastic job. I love it. I love your podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brian.
Woo! Wow, what a conversation. What great insight. Brian, I want to thank you again for being a part of this episode, for being a supporter and a follower of the Strength, Yoga, and Freedom community, for sharing your amazing insights, what you've learned through your journey, how it's taught you to transform your life and grow. So thank you again. And for those of you who are interested in James Nestor's book, I'm going to put a link to the book in the description of this episode, so you can just click and get your copy today. I'm actually getting it for myself as well. And if you've already read it and you have a comment on breathing, or something about breathing has changed your life, specifically if you're listening to this on YouTube, put a comment in the comment section of YouTube about how breathing has helped transform your life, or anything regarding yoga has helped transform your life, so that it'll help someone else, because we're all in this together. I'm also going to link Brian's wife's website in the description, so you can visit her page and support her should you be in or around her area as well. So until next week, I am wishing you lots of peace and joy and happiness, because you deserve it. Bye for now, everyone. Okay, one last thing. The content in the Strength, Yoga, and Freedom podcast is not intended as a replacement or a substitution for the advice of any medical professional, like a physician, a psychologist, or a qualified therapist, or any other medical professional. It is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only.